Dear listener, welcome back to this quiet space we share. Tonight, our journey takes us to a different realm, a land of snow-capped mountains and ancient secrets, a land of magic and myth. Let the sounds of your world begin to fade, and in their place, let the gentle whisper of a northern wind and the distant call of a hunting eagle begin to rise. We are traveling to the province of Skyrim, to a small, peaceful village nestled at the foot of the great mountain, the throat of the world. Our story begins, as so many great stories do, on a quiet evening, with a simple, unexpected knock at the door. The evening descended upon the small village of Ivarstead in a soft, gray blanket of fog. The village, nestled in a quiet valley near the base of the great mountain, seemed to be holding its breath, caught in the perfect, peaceful balance between the last light of day and the deep, coming darkness of the night. The air was thick and cool, and it carried on its gentle currents the ancient, comforting memory of pine and snow. From the chimneys of the sturdy stone cottages, wisps of pale gray smoke curled lazily into the twilight sky, rising up past the painted, lavender-hued clouds, and beyond, toward the jagged, snow-dusted peak of the great mountain that watched over the village like a sleeping giant. The steady, rhythmic drumming of the Darkwater River, which flowed through the heart of the village, was a constant, soothing presence, a gentle, watery lullaby that had sung the people of Ivarstead to sleep for generations. Across the old stone bridge that spanned the river, a single, thatched-roof cottage stood, its ivy-covered walls a testament to the passage of many long winters. Behind the weathered, leaded glass of its small windows, a warm, flickering, amber glow could be seen, a beacon of comfort against the gathering dusk. Inside, the sound of footsteps creaked softly on the old wooden floorboards. A young woman named Alara knelt down in front of the crackling fireplace, her face illuminated by the gentle, dancing flames. She lifted a long wooden spoon and gave the bubbling pot of potato stew a final, slow stir. Tendrils of herbaceous steam, smelling of garlic and thyme and the good, dark earth, danced into the rafters, twirling up past the braids of dried garlic and the heavy, ancient wooden beams of the cottage roof. Finally, after a long day of gathering herbs in the nearby woods and tending to the minor ailments of her fellow villagers, Alara sat down at her small, worn, wooden table to enjoy her well-deserved evening meal. The warmth of the fire was at her back, the simple, hearty stew warmed her from the inside, and a profound sense of peace settled over her. This was her life, a quiet and simple one, governed by the turning of the seasons and the needs of her small community. She was a healer, a herbalist, a woman who understood the secret language of the plants and the quiet rhythms of the natural world. It was in this moment of perfect, peaceful solitude that she heard it. A sound that was both simple and, in this quiet village, strangely out of place. A knock at the door. It was not the familiar, friendly rap of a neighbor, nor was it the urgent banging of a villager in need of her skills. It was a single, deliberate, and somehow hesitant knock. Curiosity piqued, Alara rose from her chair and swung open the heavy wooden door. To her surprise, she found herself face to face with a stranger, an older elven figure, their form cloaked in heavy, dark robes whose edges seemed to fade and dissolve into the deep shadows of the dusk. Their face was completely obscured by the deep folds of their hood, their identity left a total and unnerving mystery. The stranger did not speak. Instead, they extended a slender, long-fingered hand, and in that hand, they held a tall, metal lantern. It was the strangest lantern Alara had ever seen. It seemed to be both ancient and newly made, its opalescent metal finish shining with a strange, inner magic. But it was the light it cast that was truly mesmerizing. It was not the warm, familiar, golden glow of a normal lantern. This light was a deep, ethereal, and unsettling emerald green. The lantern's radiance danced across the walls of her small cottage, its light seeming to travel farther than should have been possible, bringing every quiet nook and dusty corner of the old building to life. Intricate, shifting patterns of shimmering emerald and a strange, pearlescent blue teased at colors that Alara had never seen before. She felt, somehow, that if she looked hard enough into that strange, green light, there were deep and ancient secrets to be known within its swirling depths. Before she could utter a single word of protest or of inquiry, before she could ask who this stranger was or what they wanted, the hooded figure simply, silently, vanished back into the gathering darkness, leaving behind nothing but the elusive memory of their brief, unsettling presence, and on her doorstep, the strange, silent, and now softly glowing emerald lantern. The following morning dawned with a strange and heavy air. A milky, pale light filtered through the thick fog that still clung to the valley, and the usual cheerful chorus of birdsong that greeted the sunrise was absent, replaced by a profound and unsettling silence. Alara awoke from a restless sleep, the memory of the hooded stranger and the eerie, green light of the lantern still vivid in her mind. She rose and went to her door, and there, on her doorstep, sat the lantern. In the pale morning light, it seemed less magical and more menacing. Its opalescent metal was cold to the touch, and the emerald glow within had dimmed to a faint, sickly pulse. She brought it inside, placing it on a far table, its quiet presence filling her small cottage with a sense of unease she could not quite name. As she emerged from her cottage to begin her day, she was met with an unsettling and heartbreaking sight. The once vibrant fields of Ivarstead, the very lifeblood of the village, lay barren and lifeless. The lush, green stalks of wheat and the golden heads of barley that had, just the day before, promised a bountiful harvest, were now withered and dying under the morning sun. The landscape, which should have been a tapestry of green and gold, was now a desolate, uniform brown. The skeletal remains of the plants crumbled to dust at the slightest touch of the wind. A strange, unnatural blight had fallen upon the land overnight, a decay so swift and so absolute that it seemed to defy all the laws of nature that Alara knew. A low murmur of fear and disbelief spread like wildfire through the silent village. Villagers gathered quietly outside their homes, their faces hollow with a new and sudden worry. Mothers clutched their children close, whispering prayers to the 9 divines, while the men spoke in hushed, anxious tones, their eyes scanning the blighted fields and the empty horizon for any clue, any answer. Alara's own heart sank as she made her way through the town. A small crowd had gathered around a worried mother who was cradling her feverish child. The boy's face was pale, his breathing was labored, and his skin was hot to the touch. A mysterious illness, it seemed, had come in the night, hand in hand with the blight that had destroyed their crops. "Alara," a familiar voice called out, laced with a desperation she had never heard before. She turned to see Wilhelm, the village innkeeper, a man whose usually stoic and sturdy frame now seemed weakened, stooped with a heavy burden. "Can you help us?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "My wife and my daughter, they are both ill, and I don't know what to do." Alara nodded, her own fear now crystallizing into a firm and steady resolve. "I'll do what I can," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Let me see them." As she followed him to the inn, her mind raced, her thoughts returning again and again to the strange lantern that now sat in her cottage. A sinking feeling took root in her chest as she recalled the eerie, emerald glow, the unnatural, shimmering patterns it had cast upon her walls. Could it be connected to this sudden blight, this strange and sudden illness that was now plaguing Ivarstead? Wilhelm guided Alara to a quiet room at the back of the inn. He pushed open the creaky wooden door to reveal his wife and his young daughter, lying side by side on a sturdy wooden bed. Both were resting atop thick woolen blankets, their faces flushed with an unnatural, feverish heat. Alara approached the bed, the dim glow of the candlelight casting soft, flickering shadows across their brows. With a gentle, practiced touch, she examined them, her healer's eye meticulously noting the strange and unfamiliar symptoms. Their skin was warm and unnaturally dry, a stark contrast to the cold sweat she would have expected from a normal fever. And stranger still, there was a peculiar, almost ethereal pallor to their skin, a faint, ghostly shimmer that seemed to pulse just beneath their flushed cheeks. These symptoms, she realized with a growing and terrible sense of unease, were unlike any ailment she had encountered in all her years of practice. It was as if their very life force was being slowly, quietly drained away. After offering some simple herbal remedies to provide what temporary relief she could, Alara made her way back to her own small cottage, her mind turning over the unsettling events of the previous night. She recalled watching from her window as the hooded figure had departed, a silent shadow moving through the village and out across the old stone bridge. And as the figure had disappeared into the night, Alara's gaze had lingered on the path they had taken. In the dim light of the moon, she thought she had seen a faint, emerald glow lingering in the stranger's wake, casting an eerie hue upon the stones of the path and the facades of the nearby houses. At the time, she had dismissed it as a trick of the fog and the moonlight. But now she was not so sure. What if the lantern was the harbinger of this curse? She rushed to her dusty shelves, pulling down the ancient, leather-bound tomes and the old herbalist journals that had been passed down to her through generations of healers. For hours, she pored over the yellowing, brittle pages, her fingers tracing the faded ink of ancient runes and the intricate drawings of forgotten plants, searching for any reference to a lantern with such strange and terrible properties. As the afternoon light began to fade outside her small window, a pattern began to emerge. In the margins of one ancient tome, a book of forbidden enchantments and ancient curses, her eyes caught a hastily scrawled note. The ink was faded, the handwriting almost illegible, but the warning it contained was terrifyingly clear. "Beware the light that brings darkness," the note read. "The glow that saps the life from land and soul, leaving behind only a shining, silent decay." Her suspicions were confirmed. A cold chill ran down her back, a fear more profound than any she had ever known. The hooded stranger had not been a benign visitor. The lantern was not a gift. It was a curse. She felt a great weight settle upon her shoulders, the weight of her entire village. It was she who had accepted the lantern. It was her duty, her responsibility, to unravel the threads of this dark enchantment and to find a cure. Her resolve hardening into a diamond point of determination, Alara began to pack a worn leather satchel with her most essential herbs, her sharpest knives, and her most potent potions. She looked at the emerald lantern, which still sat on the far table, its sickly green light pulsing like a malevolent heart. She vowed that she would turn this malevolent light into a beacon of hope. She would set off on a quest, a journey into the wild and dangerous heart of Skyrim, to save Ivarstead from the terrible curse that had befallen it. The world outside Alara's small cottage had fallen into a hushed and fearful silence, the usual comforting sounds of village life replaced by an atmosphere of quiet dread. But inside her home, a different kind of quiet reigned. It was the deep, focused silence of a scholar on a desperate hunt. The emerald lantern sat on a far table, its sickly green light pulsing like a malevolent heart, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls, seeming to mock her with its silent, otherworldly power. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment, of dried herbs, and of a faint, metallic tang that seemed to emanate from the lantern itself. For Alara, her small, familiar cottage, usually a sanctuary of peace and warmth, had now become a great library, a crucible of knowledge where the fate of Ivarstead would be decided. Her quest for a cure began with the familiar. She first turned to the books she knew best, the great, heavy, leather-bound herbals that had been passed down to her through generations of healers. She ran her fingers over the familiar, embossed titles, The Herbalist's Guide to Skyrim, a compendium of mountain flowers, the virtues of river-grown roots. For hours, she pored over their pages, her eyes scanning the intricate, hand-drawn illustrations of plants and the carefully scripted descriptions of their properties. She searched for any mention of a blight so swift, so absolute, that it could wither an entire field overnight. She looked for any account of a fever so strange, that it seemed to drain the very light from a person's soul. But she found nothing. The familiar pages offered no comfort, no answers. The curse that had befallen her village was something ancient, something dark, something that lay far beyond the realm of common ailments and natural diseases. A quiet desperation began to creep into her heart. She pushed aside the great herbals and turned her attention to the more obscure corners of her collection. These were the books she rarely consulted, the tomes that dealt not with the gentle art of healing, but with the darker, more complex arts of alchemy and enchantment. She pulled down a slim volume bound in what looked like wolf hide, its title, The Properties of Ethereal Shards, written in a spidery, faded script. She scanned its pages, her eyes catching on phrases that spoke of celestial power, of magic drawn from the stars themselves. Another book, its cover made of a strange, dark wood, was titled simply On Curses and Their Counteragents. It was filled with grim warnings and complex diagrams, speaking of enchantments that could poison the very earth and drain the life from all living things. The descriptions were chillingly familiar. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long, somber shadows across her small room, Alara knew she had to delve deeper still. She knelt before a large, locked chest made of dark, iron-banded oak that sat in the corner of her cottage. This was the collection she had inherited from her grandmother, a woman who had been more of a hedge witch than a simple herbalist, a woman who had understood the older, wilder magic of Skyrim. With a small, silver key that she wore on a chain around her neck, she opened the chest. A cloud of dust and the scent of ancient, dry parchment rose to meet her. Inside, lay the most secret and most dangerous of her books. She carefully lifted out the first, its cover a strange, greenish leather that seemed to shimmer with a faint light of its own. This was the Codex of Unnatural Blights. Its pages were not of paper, but of a thin, translucent vellum, and the script was written in a long-forgotten dialect of the Elven tongue. Here, she found what she was looking for. There were descriptions of curses that mirrored the devastation in the fields outside, curses that could turn fertile land to dust and poison the very streams. And then, she saw it. A small, marginal note, scrawled by a nervous hand. It spoke of a terrible artifact, a lantern crafted by an ancient and vengeful mage, a lantern that did not burn oil, but consumed the very life force of the land and the people around it, converting that stolen vitality into its eerie, emerald light. The description matched the lantern on her table perfectly. The text spoke of the lantern's curse as being almost impossible to break, but it hinted at a counter-ritual, a complex alchemical process that required 3 immensely powerful and exceptionally rare ingredients. The book, however, did not name them. Her heart pounding, Alara turned to the last and most forbidden book in the chest, a great, heavy tome bound in black leather with no title on its cover. This was a book of shadows, a collection of dangerous lore that her grandmother had warned her never to open unless the need was absolute. The need was now absolute. With trembling hands, she opened the book. Its pages whispered with a strange, dry rustle, and the air in the room grew colder. And there, in a chapter titled, "The Three Reagents of Restoration," she found the answers she sought. The first ingredient, the ancient text explained, was the heart of the snowberry. This was not the common snowberry that grew in the foothills, whose berries could be used to make simple potions of frost resistance. This was a rare, almost mythical variant of the plant that was said to grow only at the highest, most inaccessible peaks of Skyrim, on the very throat of the world itself, where the air was thin and the wind howled with the voices of the ancient sky gods. The heart of this plant, a small, crystalline nodule found within its root system, was said to contain the very essence of elemental cold and resilience, a power pure enough to counteract the life-draining heat of the lantern's curse. The second ingredient was the tears of a spectral ancestor. This was not a physical substance to be gathered, but a spiritual one, a gift to be earned. The book spoke of the ancient barrows of the first Nords, the great tombs where the spirits of the long-dead slumbered. To obtain the tears, a seeker would have to enter one of these sacred, and dangerous, places. They would have to find the tomb of one of their own ancestors, and there, through reverence and a deep, spiritual connection, they would have to commune with the past, to feel the sorrow and the memory of their own lineage so profoundly that the spectral ancestor would weep. These tears, which would manifest in the mortal world as drops of pure, shimmering ectoplasm, held the power of memory and emotion, a force that could ground the ethereal, soulless curse of the lantern. The third and final ingredient was the rarest and most powerful of all, a shard of a fallen star. The text described a time, long ago, when a star had fallen from the heavens and crashed into the earth. The ancient Dwemer, that long-lost and mysterious race of deep-dwelling elves, had found this celestial fragment and, recognizing its immense power, had built one of their great, intricate, and now ruined underground cities around it, attempting to harness its otherworldly energy. A shard of this fallen star, a piece of the very heavens themselves, contained a pure, celestial light, a creative force that could overwhelm the dark, consumptive magic of the lantern and restore the light of life to the land. As Alara finished reading, she closed the great, dark book, her mind reeling. The path before her was now clear, but it was a path of immense and terrifying danger. She would have to climb the highest mountain in all of Skyrim, a peak guarded by frost trolls and savage, icy winds. She would have to delve into the silent, haunted depths of an ancient tomb, and face the restless spirits of the dead. And she would have to navigate the dark, forgotten, and treacherous ruins of the Dwemer, a place filled with ancient, malfunctioning automatons and complex, deadly traps. It was a quest for a hero, for a great warrior. And she was just a simple village herbalist. But as she looked from the ancient, whispering pages of the book to the malevolent, pulsing green light of the lantern, she felt a new kind of strength rise within her. It was not the strength of a warrior's arm, but the quiet, unyielding strength of a healer, the fierce, protective determination of a woman fighting for her home, for her friends, for the very lives of the people she had sworn to protect. She rose from the floor, her movements now filled with a calm and resolute purpose. She banked the fire, she barred the door, and she began to pack her worn leather satchel. The whispers of the ancient tomes had fallen silent. The time for reading was over. The time for action had begun. As Alara set out on her great quest, the familiar landscape of her home unfolded before her in a breathtaking panorama of rugged, northern beauty. In the distance, the great mountains of Skyrim loomed, their jagged peaks crowned with glistening, ancient snow that seemed to sparkle like a carpet of diamonds in the crisp morning sun. The wind that swept down from these high places was sharp and clean, and the distant, piercing cry of an eagle echoed through the vast, silent valleys below. But there was no time to linger, no time to appreciate the beauty of her homeland. The fate of her village, of the people she loved, rested squarely upon her shoulders. And so, with a quiet resolve, she set her sights on the first great challenge of her quest, the heart of the Snowberry plant. The path ahead led her up the treacherous, unforgiving slopes of the great mountain, the very throat of the world. Undeterred by the daunting task before her, she began her ascent, her sturdy leather boots crunching against the frost-covered rocks as she climbed higher and higher into the jagged peaks. The air grew thinner, colder. The path, which had begun as a well-worn track, now dwindled to a narrow, precarious ledge, with a sheer drop on one side and the cold, unyielding face of the mountain on the other. The icy winds howled through the narrow passes, a mournful, lonely sound that seemed to bite at her ears and steal the very breath from her lungs. Yet Alara pressed on, her focus unwavering, her movements a careful, deliberate grace, knowing that with each step she took towards the mountain summit, the risk grew ever greater. Her footsteps, at first loud and confident on the rocky trail, now became silent, cautious, as she moved onto the deep, soft snow of the higher slopes. She paused for a moment, her senses alert, attuned to the subtlest of sounds in the vast, white wilderness. And then she heard it. A faint, low rumble that seemed to echo through the very stone of the mountain, distant, yet unmistakable. A low growl reverberated through the crisp air, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine and stood the fine hairs on the back of her neck on end. Was it merely the wind playing tricks with the strange acoustics of the high places? Or was it something else, something living, something lurking in the shadows of the great, gray rocks? She strained her ears, and then her eyes, scanning the rocky terrain, searching for any sign of movement in the stark, white landscape. And then she saw it. A faint indentation in the fresh snow, a large, clumsy footprint, a telltale sign of recent passage. Her heart quickened at the realization that she was not alone on this lonely mountain. She pressed on, her movements now even more cautious, her senses on high alert. Another growl, this time louder and closer. And as she rounded a great bend in the path, she finally caught sight of them. The hulking, brutish forms of frost trolls, their massive frames silhouetted against the pale morning sky. The dense, white fur that covered their dangling, muscular arms was matted with ice and old, dried blood. They prowled the rocky outcrops with a slow, deliberate menace, their three, small, dark eyes glinting with a primal, hungry intelligence. Steaming, hot breath billowed out from between their jagged, yellowed teeth as they scanned the mountainside for prey. Alara pressed herself flat against the cold, hard stone on the side of the path, her breath coming in shallow, silent gasps as she watched the great beasts pass by. Their heavy footsteps shook the very earth with each thunderous stride. She dared not move, she dared not even breathe, lest she draw their terrible attention and face their savage wrath. For what felt like an eternity, she remained frozen in place, a small, still figure in a world of ice and rock and monstrous, ancient life. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the trolls vanished back into the swirling snows, their presence nothing more now than a series of deep, unsettling footprints etched into the frigid landscape. With a silent, shuddering exhale of relief, Alara resumed her climb, her heart still pounding in her chest from the terrifying encounter. At last, after hours of grueling, breathless ascent, she reached the very summit of the throat of the world. A great, profound silence reigned here, at the roof of the world. The air was thin and sharp, and the sky above was a deep, impossible blue. Despite the biting cold, despite the exhaustion that threatened to consume her, she pressed on, her eyes scanning the rocky, windswept terrain for any sign of the elusive plant she sought. And then, at long last, she found it. Huddled in the lee of a great, wind-scoured boulder, a small, delicate cluster of snowberry bushes. They were unlike any she had ever seen before. Their crimson berries glistened like drops of fresh blood against the stark, white landscape. With trembling, frost-numbed hands, Alara carefully dug the plant from the frozen ground, its roots a deep, dark, vibrant red. She reached into the root system and, with a gentle tug, she plucked the heart of the plant, a small, crystalline nodule that seemed to thrum with a life of its own, its inner facets glowing with a faint, cool, blue light. She held it in the palm of her hand, this small, frozen treasure, the very essence of elemental cold and resilience, and a quiet sense of triumph warmed her. The first great challenge was met. The first ingredient was hers. The descent from the throat of the world was a journey through a different kind of peril. The stark, open danger of the high peaks, with their howling winds and their prowling frost trolls, was now replaced by the quiet, creeping chill of the lower slopes. Alara moved with a newfound confidence, the small, crystalline snowberry heart safely tucked away in a pouch lined with soft rabbit fur, its faint, cool thrum against her side a constant reminder of her first small victory. The path downward was a winding, treacherous ribbon of stone and ice, and she navigated it with the same careful grace that had carried her to the summit. As she descended, the air grew thicker, warmer, and the profound silence of the high places was slowly replaced by the gentle, familiar sounds of the living world, the rustle of wind through the hardy mountain pines, the distant chatter of a mountain stream, the cry of a hawk circling in the vast, open sky. Her journey now took her southward, away from the great mountain and into the vast, windswept tundra of Whiterun Hold. This was a land of immense, rolling plains, a great, golden sea of grass that stretched to the horizon, dotted with ancient, gray standing stones and the lonely, windswept forms of giant camps. The sky here was immense, a great, open canvas upon which the clouds painted slow, majestic pictures. For days, she walked, her journey a quiet, solitary meditation. She followed the winding path of the White River, its waters a clear, cold silver, its banks lined with the delicate, purple blossoms of the mountain flower. By night, she would find shelter in the lee of a great rock or in the hollow of an ancient tree, building a small, smokeless fire to ward off the chill, her gaze fixed on the brilliant, unfamiliar constellations that wheeled slowly across the northern sky. Her destination was a place spoken of only in hushed tones by the people of the Hold, a place of deep history and profound, sorrowful reverence. She was seeking the ancient burial grounds of the first Nords, the great barrows where the heroes of a long-forgotten age slumbered in their cold, stone tombs. Her grandmother's book had been specific. She was to seek out a place known as Fog Barrows, a complex of tombs that dated back to the earliest days of the First Era, a place said to be so ancient that the very stones whispered with the memories of the dead. As she drew closer to the barrows, the landscape began to change once more. The open, sun-drenched plains gave way to a more rugged, hilly terrain, the earth littered with great, gray stones that seemed to have been placed by the hands of giants. The air grew still and cold, and a strange, heavy silence settled over the land, a silence that seemed to absorb all sound. The cheerful chirping of insects ceased. The wind itself seemed to die down, its voice a low, mournful whisper among the ancient stones. She had entered a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was thin. Finally, she saw it. The entrance to the barrow was a great, dark archway of hewn stone, set into the side of a low, grassy hill. The stones were immense, covered in a thick carpet of green moss and etched with the faint, swirling patterns of ancient Nord carvings. A single, great stone door, its surface worn smooth by the passage of 1,000 years of wind and rain, stood slightly ajar, a silent, dark invitation into the earth itself. Alara paused at the entrance, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum in the profound silence. She took a deep breath, the air cold and tasting of damp earth and old stone, and she stepped across the threshold, leaving the world of light and life behind her. Inside, the darkness was absolute, a thick, palpable blackness that seemed to press in on her from all sides. The air was cold and still, and it carried the scent of dust, of decay, and of a deep, ancient sorrow. With a quiet, practiced movement, she lit a small torch. Its warm, flickering, golden light pushed back the immediate darkness, but it only served to emphasize the immense, cavernous space around her. The torchlight danced on the damp stone walls, revealing intricate, faded carvings of great battles, of longships sailing on stormy seas, of dragons and heroes locked in eternal combat. She moved deeper into the tomb, her footsteps echoing in the vast, silent chambers. The path led her downward, into the very heart of the earth. She passed through great, vaulted halls, their ceilings lost in the darkness above. On either side of the path, rows of stone sarcophagi stood like silent, sleeping sentinels. From within these ancient coffins, she could feel a faint, cold presence, the slumbering spirits of the long-dead Nord warriors. She moved with a profound sense of reverence, her steps light, her breathing shallow, careful not to disturb their eternal rest. The barrow was not merely a tomb, it was a great, complex puzzle, a series of ancient, ingenious mechanisms designed to protect the honored dead from grave robbers. She encountered great stone doors that would only open when a series of carved stone pillars were turned to the correct sequence of symbols: a hawk, a snake, a whale. She used her keen, herbalist's eye for detail and her scholar's understanding of ancient symbols to solve these puzzles, her mind working with a calm, focused clarity. She crossed a great, echoing chamber on a series of precarious, pressure-sensitive tiles, carefully mapping out the safe path by observing the subtle patterns of wear on the ancient stone. She was not a warrior, and she had no desire to disturb the dead. Her path was one of respect, of quiet passage, of a healer seeking not to conquer, but to understand. Finally, after what felt like hours of descent into the cold, silent earth, she reached the central burial chamber. It was a vast, circular room, its high, domed ceiling supported by great, carved stone pillars. In the very center of the room, upon a raised stone dais, sat a single, magnificent sarcophagus. The air here was different. It was heavy with the weight of ages, with a sense of profound and concentrated sorrow. This, she knew, was the tomb of the ancestor she sought, a great shield maiden of her own lineage, a woman whose name she had found in the faded pages of her family's history. Alara did not approach the tomb with a sense of triumph, but with one of deep and solemn reverence. She knelt before the great stone coffin and began her quiet ritual. From her satchel, she took a small bundle of dried deathbell flowers and nightshade, herbs associated not with poison, but with the quiet passage between worlds. She lit them with her torch, and a thin, fragrant, purple smoke curled into the still air, a humble offering to the slumbering spirit. She closed her eyes, her mind reaching out into the profound silence of the tomb. She did not speak with her voice, but with her heart. She thought of her village, of the withered fields, of the sick and dying children. She thought of her own fear, her own desperation, and of the small, flickering flame of hope that had carried her on this long and dangerous journey. And as she focused her thoughts, her heart filled with a deep and empathetic sorrow, she felt a change in the air. A faint, ethereal shimmer began to form above the great sarcophagus, a pale, blue light that slowly coalesced into the ghostly, translucent form of a tall, proud woman in ancient Nord armor. The spirit did not speak, but Alara could feel its immense, ancient grief, a sorrow not just for its own long-lost life, but for the suffering of its descendants. And as this shared wave of sorrow washed over them, two single, shimmering drops, like liquid moonlight, condensed on the cold stone lid of the sarcophagus. The Spectral Tears. With trembling hands, Alara carefully collected the two precious, glowing droplets into a small, crystal phial. They were cool to the touch, and they seemed to pulse with a soft, gentle, blue light, a light of memory, of emotion, of a deep and profound connection to the past. She rose to her feet, her heart filled with a sense of gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. The second great challenge had been met. The second ingredient was hers. She gave a final, deep bow to the silent, watching spirit, and then, she turned and began her long journey back, out of the silent slumber of the dead, and into the world of the living once more. Emerging from the profound, sorrowful silence of the ancient barrow, Alara was met with the gentle light of a new day. The crystal phial containing the spectral tears was cool against her skin, its soft, blue light a quiet, comforting presence in her satchel. Two of the great challenges had been met. Two of the three sacred ingredients were now hers. But the final part of her quest, she knew, would be the most dangerous of all. She now had to journey to the northern reaches of Skyrim, to a land of desolate, windswept tundra and rugged, unforgiving cliffs. Her destination was a place spoken of only in whispers and legends, a place that most believed to be nothing more than a myth, a great, ruined, and long-forgotten city of the Dwemer, the deep-dwelling elves, a race that had vanished from the face of Tamriel thousands of years before, leaving behind only the strange, silent, and often deadly remnants of their advanced and mysterious civilization. It was said that somewhere within this forgotten city lay the final ingredient she sought, a shard of a fallen star. Her journey northward was a long and solitary one. The landscape gradually transformed around her. The golden, grassy plains of Whiterun gave way to a starker, more rugged beauty. She rode through deep, shadowy pine forests, where the air was thick with the scent of cedar and damp earth. She followed the winding paths that clung to the sides of towering cliffs, the sound of distant waterfalls a constant, low thunder in the air. The northern wilds were home to more than just giants and trolls. Packs of wolves, their eyes gleaming like embers in the twilight, sometimes shadowed her path, their lonely howls echoing through the valleys. But Alara, her senses sharpened by her quest, her heart steeled by her purpose, moved with a quiet, confident grace, avoiding danger, her presence a mere whisper in the vast, ancient wilderness. By midday of the third day of her journey, she had successfully skirted the main camps of the giants and found herself on a less traveled path that led deep into the heart of the northern mountains. The landscape here was breathtaking in its desolation. Jagged peaks, their stone faces scarred by millennia of wind and ice, rose against a pale, cold sky. After many hours of navigating the treacherous, winding path, she finally saw it. It was not a grand entrance, but a dark, almost imperceptible opening in a high cliffside, partially obscured by overgrown, thorny vegetation. But the unmistakable, geometric patterns of Dwemer architecture were visible on the great stone door, their strange, angular lines a stark contrast to the organic chaos of the natural world around it. She led her horse to a small, sheltered spot where it could rest safely, and then, drawing her sharp herbalist's knife, she cautiously approached the ruin. The air inside was cold and still, and it held a strange, metallic tang, the faint, lingering smell of rust and ancient, long-dead machinery. Her torch, when she lit it, cast eerie, dancing shadows on the walls, revealing a maze of long, echoing corridors and vast, silent chambers, all of them filled with the strange and beautiful remnants of a long-lost civilization. Rusted gears the size of millstones and great, broken mechanical constructs lay scattered across the floor, their intricate bronze and brass workings silent witnesses to the passage of thousands of years. She moved carefully, her footsteps echoing softly in the profound silence. This was not like the ancient barrow of the Nords, a place filled with the slumbering spirits of the dead. This place was different. It was empty. The silence here was a more profound one, the silence of a people who had not just died, but had simply, utterly, and inexplicably vanished, leaving behind only the ghost of their genius. The deeper she went, the more intricate and strange the mechanisms became. Faintly glowing crystals, of a kind she had never seen before, were set into the walls at regular intervals, providing a ghostly, pale blue illumination. Great, golden pipes ran along the ceilings, humming with a faint, low vibration, a sound that seemed to resonate deep in her bones. This was a place of immense and forgotten power. And as she ventured deeper into the labyrinth, she could feel it, a new kind of energy, a faint, rhythmic pulse that seemed to be drawing her onward. It was the call of the fallen star. The ruin was a great puzzle. Her path was often blocked by massive, intricately carved metal doors that would only open when she solved complex mechanical riddles. She had to redirect the flow of steam through ancient pipes, turning great, rusted wheels in the correct sequence to align a series of massive, grinding gears. She had to navigate great, cavernous chambers, avoiding the ancient, and still active, pressure plates that would trigger deadly traps of spinning blades or poison darts. But Alara, with her patient, herbalist's mind, her keen eye for patterns, and her deep understanding of the interconnectedness of things, was able to see the logic in the chaos. She saw the Dwemer ruin not as a series of traps, but as a single, great, complex machine, and she slowly, carefully, began to understand how it worked. After what felt like an eternity of descent into the dark, humming heart of the forgotten city, she reached a vast, circular chamber. Its high, domed ceiling was supported by massive, ornately carved pillars of a strange, dark metal. And in the very center of the room, upon a raised dais, bathed in a soft, ethereal, blue light, lay the shard of the fallen star. It was embedded in a great, intricate, and still-moving Dwemer mechanism, a complex orrery of rotating golden rings and spinning gears, all of it powered by the shard's own otherworldly energy. She approached the strange artifact, feeling its power, a gentle, rhythmic hum that resonated not just in the air, but in the very core of her being. The shard itself was not large, no bigger than her own heart. Its surface was a deep, impossible black, yet it seemed to absorb all the light in the room, and from its core, it emitted a soft, pulsing, pale blue light. This light bathed the chamber in a gentle, ethereal glow, illuminating the ancient, intricate carvings that covered the walls, carvings that told the story of the star's fall from the heavens, and of the Dwemer's long and ultimately futile attempts to harness its celestial power. As she reached out to grasp the shard, she felt a great surge of energy, a dizzying connection to something far greater than herself, a sense of the vast, cold, and beautiful emptiness of the cosmos. The shard was cool to the touch, its surface impossibly smooth and unmarred, despite the ages it had lain here in the darkness. She carefully lifted it from its resting place in the heart of the great machine. As she did, the machine itself, which had been humming and spinning for thousands of years, slowly, with a final, great, metallic sigh, ground to a halt. The glowing crystals on the walls flickered and died. The last spark of the Dwemer's genius had been extinguished. With the shard of the fallen star now safely in her possession, Alara began her long journey back, out of the now dark and silent ruin. Her path was lit now only by the gentle, pulsing, blue glow of the shard itself. The way out seemed longer, the shadows darker, but she moved with a new sense of purpose, knowing that she now held the final key, the final ingredient that would change the course of her quest, and perhaps, the fate of all of Skyrim itself. As Alara emerged from the profound, ancient silence of the Dwemer ruin, she was met by the cool, crisp air of the northern night. The sky above was a deep, velvety black, a clean slate for the brilliant, scattered jewels of the stars. The two moons, Maser and Secunda, hung low in the sky, their silver light casting long, ethereal shadows across the rugged, mountainous landscape. She mounted her horse, its warm, familiar presence a comfort after the cold, metallic strangeness of the forgotten city. With the three sacred ingredients now safely tucked away in her worn leather satchel, the crystalline heart of the Snowberry, the shimmering tears of her ancestor, and the celestial shard of the fallen star, she turned her face south and began the long journey back to Ivarstead. Her path was now lit by the gentle, pulsing, blue glow of the shard, a soft, otherworldly light that seemed to hold the very essence of the night sky within it. For the first few hours, her heart was filled with a sense of quiet, weary triumph. She had faced the challenges of the throat of the world, she had communed with the spirits of the dead, and she had navigated the deadly puzzles of a long-lost race. She had succeeded where many a great warrior or powerful mage might have failed. The hope for her village, which had seemed so distant and so fragile just days before, now felt real, tangible, a warm and steady flame in her heart. She rode through the night, the rhythmic, steady gait of her horse a soothing lullaby, the cool northern wind a gentle whisper in the pine trees. The landscape unfolded before her, a breathtaking panorama of rugged beauty under the shimmering, spectral light of the aurora, which had now begun its slow, silent dance across the northern horizon. Ribbons of pale green and ethereal violet light stretched from horizon to horizon, shimmering and shifting as if the gods themselves were breathing softly upon the canvas of the sky. It was a sight of such profound and majestic beauty that it filled her with a sense of awe, and for a time, she forgot her weariness, her fear, and the terrible curse that awaited her at her journey's end. But as the miles passed beneath her horse's steady hooves, as she left the high mountains behind and descended once more into the rolling plains of the Whiterun Hold, she couldn't shake a new and unsettling feeling, a strange and persistent unease that began to gnaw at the edges of her consciousness. It started as a faint, prickling sensation at the nape of her neck, the subtle, primal awareness that she was not entirely alone, the feeling that she was being watched. At first, she dismissed it. It was just the weariness of her long journey, she told herself, her mind playing tricks on her in the vast, lonely emptiness of the northern plains. The distant howl of a wolf was just a wolf. The sudden snap of a twig in the darkness of a nearby copse of trees was just a foraging animal. The fleeting movement she caught at the very edge of her vision was just a shadow, a cloud passing before the face of the moon. But the feeling persisted. It was a silent, patient, and unwavering presence that seemed to keep pace with her, no matter how fast she rode. The shadow was always there, a silent sentinel trailing her every move. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to take hold, but Alara, a woman whose life had been an education in patience and calm observation, forced it down. She slowed her horse to a walk, her senses on high alert, her ears straining to catch any sound that was out of place in the quiet symphony of the night. And then she heard it. It was not the sound of an animal. It was the soft, deliberate, and almost silent sound of a footfall on the grassy plain, a sound that was trying very hard not to be heard. Her heart now a cold, hard knot in her chest, Alara urged her horse into a canter, and then into a full gallop, racing across the open plains. But the shadow persisted, a dark, fleeting shape that moved with an unnatural speed through the scattered trees and rocky outcroppings at the edge of the road, always keeping pace, always just at the edge of her vision. Her mind raced. Who was this pursuer? Was it an agent of the same mysterious, hooded elf who had brought the cursed lantern to her door? Was it some dark creature drawn by the immense magical power of the ingredients she now carried? Or was it something else entirely? She did not know. All she knew was that she could not lead it back to her vulnerable, ailing village. She had to lose it, here, in the vast and unforgiving wilderness. With a plan forming in her mind, Alara veered sharply off the main road, plunging into the dense undergrowth of a dark forest. She ducked beneath the low-hanging branches of the ancient pine trees, weaving through their great, silent trunks with a practiced ease, her knowledge of the wild places now her greatest weapon. Her pursuer followed close behind, the sound of their footfalls now a clear and menacing presence in the quiet of the forest. Alara spotted a narrow ravine cutting through the forest floor, its steep, rocky sides offering a chance of shelter, a place where she might break the line of sight and finally lose her pursuer. With a swift command, she urged her horse forward, racing towards the safety of the ravine. At the last possible moment, she pulled back hard on the reins, guiding her horse into a sharp, skidding turn that sent them careening down the steep, rocky side of the ravine. The horse stumbled on the uneven terrain, but Alara clung to its back as they descended into the deep, absolute darkness at the bottom. She risked a glance over her shoulder. And for a moment, she felt a wave of profound relief wash over her. The shadow had disappeared, swallowed up by the night. She had done it. She had lost it. With a deep sigh, she slowed her horse to a halt, allowing them both a moment of precious, quiet calm. She knew she could not push on through the night. She was exhausted, her body aching, her mind frayed from the long days of travel and the constant, gnawing tension of the pursuit. She guided her horse up the other side of the ravine and found a small, sheltered clearing. There, she began to set up her camp for the night. She gathered fallen branches and dry kindling, carefully arranging them to build a small, smokeless fire. The strike of flint against steel brought a spark, which she gently coaxed into a small, crackling flame. The fire quickly pushed back the harsh chill of the midnight air, casting a warm, golden, and comforting glow across the small clearing. She unfurled her bedroll and laid it out near the fire, its thick, woolen fabric promising a safe haven against the cold, hard ground. She took a deep breath, the deepest breath she had taken in days, and for the first time since leaving the Dwemer ruin, she allowed her body to relax. She laid her head back, gazing up at the clear night sky, at the brilliant, cold pinpricks of the stars scattered against the endless, velvety expanse. And as she watched them, her eyelids grew heavy. The gentle, crackling song of the fire was a soothing lullaby, and the heavy embrace of sleep began to approach. And just as she was about to drift away, just as the world was beginning to soften and dissolve at the edges, she heard it. It was not the sound of the wind. It was not the sound of a foraging animal. It was the soft, deliberate, and unmistakable sound of a single, dry twig snapping in the darkness, just beyond the edge of her small circle of firelight. Her eyes flew open, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. The shadow had not been lost. It had been hunting her. And now, it had found her. Her eyes flew open, the soft, hazy veil of approaching sleep torn away in an instant. The sound had been unmistakable. It was not the gentle settling of the earth, nor the random foraging of a forest creature. It was the sharp, deliberate crack of a dry twig, snapping under a heavy, careful footstep, just beyond the small, protective circle of her firelight. Her heart, which had been slowing to the gentle rhythm of sleep, now became a cold, hard stone in her chest. A profound and chilling silence followed the sound, a silence that was more terrifying than any noise. The gentle, crackling song of the fire now seemed impossibly loud, a beacon in the darkness that advertised her presence to the unseen watcher. She did not move. She did not even breathe. She lay perfectly still on her bedroll, her senses straining, listening to the vast, dark silence of the forest around her. The shadow had not been lost. It had been hunting her. And now, it had found her. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in her throat, a primal urge to leap to her feet and flee into the darkness. But Alara, a woman whose entire life had been an education in patience, in the quiet observation of the natural world, suppressed it. She knew that to run blindly would be to invite a swift and certain end. Her mind, honed by years of study and the careful, methodical work of a healer, began to race, not with fear, but with a cold, clear, and calculated logic. She remained motionless, her breathing slow and even, feigning the deep sleep she had been so close to just moments before. Through her barely open eyelids, she scanned the edge of the firelight, the line where the warm, golden glow met the deep, impenetrable blackness of the forest. And she saw it. It was not a man, not a beast. It was a shifting patch of darkness, a place where the shadows seemed deeper, more absolute than the surrounding night. It moved with a silent, unnatural grace, a fluid, predatory patience that was utterly terrifying. It was the same presence she had felt on the road, the same relentless pursuer. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this creature was not here to talk. It was here for the sacred ingredients she carried in her satchel, the 3 keys to breaking the curse of the Emerald Lantern. And it would not hesitate to destroy her to get them. Slowly, carefully, without a single wasted or sudden movement, she began to reach for the small leather pouch that lay beside her on the bedroll. It did not contain a weapon in the conventional sense. It contained a fine, gray powder, a mixture of dried moon sugar and the ground petals of the deathbell flower, a potent alchemical preparation that did not cause harm, but confusion. It was a powder she used to calm frightened animals, to soothe the agitated minds of those suffering from fevers. Now, she prayed to the 9 divines that it would work on a creature of shadow. With a single, swift movement, Alara sprang to her feet, spun around, and cast the contents of the pouch directly into the darkness where the shadow lurked. The fine powder hung in the air for a moment, catching the firelight, a shimmering, gray cloud. And from the darkness, there came a strange, guttural hiss, a sound of surprise and frustration. It was the opening she needed. She did not wait to see the effect. She grabbed her satchel, and without a backward glance, she plunged into the darkness on the opposite side of the clearing, running with a desperate, silent speed through the ancient, moon-dappled forest. And so began the great chase under the light of the twin moons. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful just hours before, now became a treacherous labyrinth of grasping roots and low-hanging branches. Alara moved with the instinctive grace of someone who had spent their life in the wild places, her feet finding a sure path, her body weaving through the trees. Behind her, she could hear the shadow in pursuit, its movements no longer silent, but a series of heavy, crashing sounds as it tore through the undergrowth, its unnatural speed a terrifying counterpoint to her own desperate flight. She used her knowledge of the land, her herbalist's wisdom, as her only weapon. She ran through thick patches of thistle and thorny brambles, knowing that while they tore at her own cloak, they would surely slow the larger, less agile creature that pursued her. She crushed handfuls of pungent herbs as she ran, leaving a confusing trail of conflicting scents to throw off any creature that might be tracking her by smell. She followed the winding, twisting paths of game trails, hoping to use the natural confusion of the forest to her advantage. For what felt like an eternity, she ran, her lungs burning, her muscles aching, the rhythmic pounding of her own heart the only drumbeat in the silent, moonlit world. The chase led her out of the deep forest and onto the open, rolling hills of the tundra once more. Here, under the vast, open sky, there was nowhere left to hide. The pale, silver light of the moons bathed the landscape in a ghostly, ethereal glow. She could see her pursuer now, a great, dark, hunched shape, bounding across the plains with an incredible, loping gait, closing the distance between them with every powerful stride. Desperation gave her a new idea. She remembered a place from her travels, a place of ancient and powerful magic, a great, steaming, geothermal marsh, a place of bubbling mud pots and hissing vents that released strange, sulphurous clouds into the night air. It was a dangerous, unpredictable landscape, but its very chaos might offer her a chance of escape. She turned her course, running now toward the distant, faint plumes of steam that rose into the night sky. As she entered the marsh, the ground beneath her feet grew soft and treacherous. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and strange, subterranean minerals. Great, bubbling pools of mud gurgled and spat, their surfaces catching the moonlight like dark, oily mirrors. And from deep fissures in the earth, great jets of hot steam erupted with a sudden, deafening hiss. She moved carefully now, leaping from one solid patch of ground to the next, using the thick, disorienting clouds of steam as cover. Her pursuer, less cautious in its rage and its eagerness, plunged into the marsh behind her. She heard a great cry of pain and frustration as the creature stumbled into one of the scalding mud pots. This gave her a precious few moments. She scrambled up a high, rocky outcrop at the far end of the marsh and looked back. The shadow creature was extricating itself from the mud, its form now coated in the thick, gray substance, its movements slower, more labored. She had bought herself time. From the high outcrop, she saw a new path, a way forward. It was a great, ancient, fallen log that spanned a deep and dark chasm, a natural bridge to the other side. With the last of her strength, she ran across it, her feet sure and steady on the rough bark. Once she was safely on the other side, she put her shoulder to the end of the great log and, with a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, she pushed. The ancient, rotted wood groaned in protest, and then, with a great, splintering crash, the log tumbled into the chasm below, severing the path behind her. She stood there for a long moment, on the edge of the chasm, her body trembling, her lungs gasping for air, and she watched. On the far side, the shadow creature finally arrived, its form still dripping with the hot, gray mud of the marsh. It stopped at the edge of the newly formed abyss, and for the first time, it seemed to let out a sound not of rage, but of pure, absolute frustration, a terrible, guttural howl that echoed through the silent, moonlit landscape. Alara did not wait to hear more. She turned and fled, melting into the safety of the trees on the other side, her heart filled with a single, overwhelming thought: she had survived. The great chase under the moonlight was over. And now, the path home, the path to the final confrontation, was clear. The journey back to Ivarstead was a strange and dreamlike passage through a land that seemed to be holding its breath. After the desperate flight through the moonlit plains and the terrifying confrontation in the geothermal marsh, a profound and weary silence had settled over Alara. She rode through the familiar landscapes of her homeland, but she saw them now with new eyes, her senses sharpened by the dangers she had faced. The low, rolling hills of the Whiterun Hold, the golden sea of grass swaying gently in the cool morning breeze, the distant, majestic peak of the throat of the world, it all seemed both achingly familiar and strangely distant, a world she had fought for, and a world she was not yet certain she could save. As she drew closer to her home, a deep sense of foreboding began to replace the quiet relief of her escape. She urged her horse onward, and as they crested the final ridge that overlooked the small, sheltered valley of Ivarstead, her heart grew cold. The sight that greeted her was worse than she had feared. The blight that had begun as a strange and sudden decay in the fields had now spread, consuming the entire valley. The great pine trees that lined the slopes, which had stood as proud, green sentinels for centuries, now stood as gaunt, brown skeletons, their needles shed, their great branches brittle and lifeless. The Darkwater River itself, which had always run with a clear and vibrant current, now flowed sluggishly, its waters a murky, unhealthy green, the same sickly, emerald hue as the cursed lantern. The village itself looked like a ghost of its former self. No cheerful curls of smoke rose from its stone chimneys. No children played in its quiet, empty streets. A terrible, unnatural silence had fallen over her home, the silence of a community in the grip of a deep and sorrowful sickness. She rode across the old stone bridge, her horse's hooves echoing loudly in the stillness. As she entered the village, the few people she saw were like shades, their faces gaunt, their movements slow and labored, their eyes filled with a deep and hollow despair. They looked at her, and a faint flicker of recognition, of hope, stirred in their weary expressions. But no one spoke. They did not have the strength. The curse of the Emerald Lantern, she now saw, was not just draining the life from the land, it was draining the very spirit from her people. She went first to the sleeping giant inn. Wilhelm, the innkeeper, was sitting on a bench outside, his head in his hands, his great, strong shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked up as she approached, and a single, difficult tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "They are worse, Alara," he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping sound. "My wife, my daughter, they barely stir. The fever does not break." Alara placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I have returned, Wilhelm," she said, her own voice quiet but steady. "And I have brought hope. But I will need your help. I must prepare." She returned to her small cottage. The emerald lantern still sat on the far table, its green light now pulsing with a triumphant, malevolent energy, as if it were feeding on the despair of the village. She ignored it, her focus absolute. She carefully unpacked her satchel, laying the 3 sacred ingredients upon her worn, wooden table. The crystalline heart of the Snowberry, its inner facets glowing with a cool, blue light, seemed to absorb the sickly green of the lantern, its pure, elemental cold a direct counterpoint to the curse's life-draining heat. The shimmering, ethereal tears of a spectral ancestor, which she carefully poured from their crystal phial into a small, alabaster bowl, seemed to hum with a soft, sorrowful music, a sound of memory and emotion that stood in stark defiance of the curse's soulless nature. And last, the shard of a fallen star, its impossibly black surface seeming to drink the very light from the room, while its core pulsed with a gentle, celestial, blue radiance, a fragment of cosmic light to fight a terrestrial darkness. Following the precise instructions from her grandmother's ancient tome, Alara began the intricate and sacred work of preparation. She took out her great, stone mortar and pestle, a tool that had been used by the healers of her line for generations. She first took the heart of the Snowberry, and with a quiet prayer to the old gods of the mountain, she began to grind the hard, crystalline nodule into a fine, glittering, pale blue powder. The work was slow and laborious, but her movements were steady and sure. As she worked, a profound cold filled the small cottage, a clean, pure cold that seemed to push back against the sickly warmth of the curse. Next, she took the spectral tears. She poured the fine, blue powder from the Snowberry heart into the alabaster bowl, where it dissolved instantly into the shimmering, ethereal liquid, the entire mixture now glowing with a soft, internal light. She then took the shard of the fallen star. The book had been very specific about this final, crucial step. The shard itself was not to be ground or dissolved. Its celestial power was too great, too wild, to be contained in a simple potion. Instead, it was to be used as a catalyst, a focus. She carried the glowing bowl and the pulsating shard to the center of her cottage. She cleared a space on her floor, and with a piece of white chalk, she began to draw a series of complex, interlocking circles and runes, patterns of power that she had only ever seen before on the faded pages of the most ancient texts. When the great ritual circle was complete, she placed the bowl with its glowing liquid at its very center. She knew that the final ritual could not be performed here, in the confines of her small home. The power that would be unleashed, the great clash between the life-draining curse of the lantern and the restorative magic of the three sacred ingredients, was too great. The book had spoken of a place of power, a place where the lines of magic that ran through the earth were strong. And she knew just the place. At the very center of the village, there was a small, ancient, and long-forgotten circle of standing stones, a place that the children sometimes played in, but that the elders of the village avoided, saying it was a place of the old magic. This is where the final confrontation would have to take place. She knew she would not have much time. Her escape from her shadowy pursuer had been a narrow one. She did not know what the creature was, but she knew it was relentless. It would be hunting her still. It would surely be drawn to the immense magical energy that was about to be unleashed. She had to act, and she had to act now. As the sun began to set, casting long, somber shadows across the blighted valley, and as the first signs of a great, gathering storm began to appear over the high peaks of the throat of the world, Alara made her final preparations. She carefully wrapped the celestial shard in a piece of clean, dark linen. She poured the glowing, blue liquid from the alabaster bowl into a stoppered flask. And she took one last look at the emerald lantern, its green light now seeming to pulse with an angry, expectant energy. Then, she took her satchel, and with a final, deep breath, she stepped out of her cottage and into the twilight. She walked to the center of the village, to the ancient circle of standing stones. The air here was strangely still and silent, a quiet that seemed to be listening, to be waiting. She knelt in the center of the circle, placing the flask and the wrapped shard on the ground before her. She could feel the storm approaching, the wind beginning to rise, carrying with it the smell of rain and wet earth. And she could feel something else, too. A dark, patient, and malevolent presence, watching her from the gathering shadows at the edge of the village. The final confrontation was at hand. The eve of the storm had arrived. The air in the ancient stone circle was unnaturally still, a pocket of profound silence in the heart of a dying village. Above, the sky had turned a deep, bruised purple, and the great storm clouds that had been gathering over the throat of the world now began to descend upon the valley, their dark underbellies lit by the occasional, silent flash of distant lightning. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper just hours before, now began to rise, a low, mournful moan that snaked its way through the skeletal branches of the withered trees and between the cold, silent stones of the circle. This was not a natural storm. It was a storm of magic, a tempest of power drawn here by the great forces that were about to be unleashed. Alara knelt in the very center of the stone circle, her back straight, her breathing slow and even. She had placed the satchel containing her worldly possessions to one side. Before her, on the cold, damp earth, lay the three sacred ingredients, the keys to her village's salvation. She ignored the rising wind, she ignored the distant rumble of thunder, she ignored the cold fear that was trying to find a home in her heart. Her entire being was focused on the task before her, a healer preparing for the greatest and most important act of healing in her life. Following the ancient ritual described in her grandmother's book, she began. She first took the flask containing the glowing, blue liquid, the dissolved heart of the Snowberry and the Spectral Tears, and with a steady hand, she carefully poured it into the shallow grooves of the chalk circle she had drawn on the ground. The liquid flowed smoothly, filling the intricate patterns of runes, its soft, blue light a stark and beautiful contrast to the dark, dying earth. The moment the circle was complete, a low hum began to fill the air, a sound that seemed to come not from any single source, but from the very stones themselves, as if they were awakening from a long, deep slumber. Next, she took the shard of the fallen star from its linen wrapping. It felt cool and impossibly smooth in her hand, its inner, celestial light pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm, like a distant, sleeping heart. She placed the shard in the very center of the great ritual circle. The moment it touched the earth, the hum of the stones grew louder, and the blue light of the runes intensified, casting a serene and holy glow upon the small clearing. The final piece of the ritual now lay before her. She had to bring the cursed lantern itself into the circle. She rose to her feet and walked to the edge of the clearing, where she had left the emerald lantern sitting on a small, flat stone. As she approached it, its sickly, green light seemed to pulse with a new and malevolent energy, as if it sensed what was about to happen. She took a deep breath, and with a hand protected by a thick leather glove, she reached out and grasped its strange, wooden handle. The lantern felt unnaturally cold, a deep, soul-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. As she turned and began to walk back towards the center of the ritual circle, a movement in the shadows at the edge of the village caught her eye. The moment she had been dreading, the moment she had been preparing for, had finally arrived. From the deep darkness between two of the silent, blighted cottages, the shadow emerged. It was the same hooded, elven figure who had come to her door on that fateful night. They moved with the same silent, unnatural grace, their dark robes seeming to flow like liquid night, their face still completely obscured by the deep, dark void of their hood. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their purpose was clear. They raised a slender, long-fingered hand, and from that hand, a bolt of pure, green, sickly energy, the very essence of the lantern's curse, shot through the air towards Alara. But Alara was ready. She did not try to dodge the bolt of dark magic. Instead, she held her ground and, raising the shard of the fallen star, she placed it directly in the path of the incoming attack. The green energy struck the celestial shard, and instead of exploding in a shower of deadly force, it was absorbed. The shard's own gentle, blue light flared brightly for a moment, and the green energy simply vanished, neutralized by the pure, cosmic power of the fallen star. A hiss of frustration came from within the hooded figure's cowl. This would not be a simple battle of magic. It would be a battle of wills, a contest between two opposing forces of nature. The figure was the lantern's guardian, bound by some ancient oath or desperate need to protect the terrible artifact and the dark magic it contained. Alara, for her part, was now the champion of the sacred ingredients, the wielder of the restorative powers of the earth, of memory, and of the heavens themselves. The guardian now changed its tactics. It raised both its hands, and as it did, the emerald lantern itself began to pulse violently, its green light flaring with a terrible intensity. And as the light grew, the land around the stone circle seemed to groan in agony. The last vestiges of life in the withered grass turned to black dust. The great stones of the circle themselves seemed to dim, their surfaces taking on a dull, lifeless sheen. The curse was being amplified, focused, its life-draining power now a palpable, physical presence in the air. Alara felt the strength being pulled from her own body, a terrible, enervating weakness that threatened to buckle her knees. But she held firm. She knelt once more in the center of her ritual circle, and placing the shard of the fallen star directly upon the glowing, blue liquid that filled the chalk runes, she began to chant. The words came to her not from memory, but from a deeper place, the ancient words of power from her grandmother's book, the language of the old magic. Her voice, at first a quiet whisper, grew stronger, clearer, its rhythm matching the slow, steady pulse of the celestial shard. As she chanted, a new kind of storm began to form within the circle of stones. The blue light of the runes and the shard began to swirl, rising from the ground in a gentle, spiraling column of pure, restorative energy. It met the oppressive, sickly green light of the lantern, and for a moment, the two forces held each other in a tense, shimmering balance. The air in the clearing grew thick and heavy, charged with an immense, almost unbearable power. The great storm in the sky above now broke in its full fury. The wind howled through the valley, and a torrential rain began to fall, a rain that seemed to be made not of water, but of pure, green light. This was the Emerald Storm. As the magical rain fell upon the land, the blight seemed to deepen, the last of the trees groaning as their branches splintered and fell. The guardian, seeing its power magnified by the storm, let out a triumphant cry. But Alara did not falter. She continued her chant, her voice now a powerful and resonant anchor in the heart of the swirling chaos. She poured all of her own strength, her own life force, her healer's will, into the ritual. And the column of blue light grew stronger, brighter, pushing back against the encroaching green darkness. The two opposing forces of magic now clashed in a great, silent, and spectacular explosion of light and color. The Emerald Storm had reached its zenith. The final confrontation between the healer and the guardian, between restoration and decay, between the light of the stars and the darkness of the curse, had finally and truly begun. In the heart of the ancient stone circle, the world had become a maelstrom of pure, untamed magic. The Emerald Storm, born of the lantern's curse, raged with a terrible fury, its green, spectral rain lashing down upon the blighted land, draining the last vestiges of life from the very soil. And in the center of this tempest, two opposing forces met in a great, silent, and spectacular clash. The sickly, life-draining green light of the lantern, amplified by the storm, pushed inward, a wave of decay and despair. And pushing back against it was the serene, steady, blue light of Alara's ritual, a column of pure, restorative energy, anchored by the celestial power of the fallen star. Alara knelt in the center of her glowing circle of runes, the wind whipping at her hair, the magical storm raging around her. She felt the immense power of the curse pressing in on her, a profound, soul-crushing weariness that threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel the life being pulled from her, the same terrible, draining sickness that had afflicted her fellow villagers. But she did not falter. She closed her eyes, shutting out the swirling chaos around her, and she focused her entire being, her entire will, on the single, pulsing point of blue light at the center of the ritual. She poured all of her healer's knowledge, all of her love for her home, all of her fierce determination, into the chant that fell from her lips. The lantern's guardian stood at the edge of the circle, a dark, hooded figure silhouetted against the raging green storm. He raised his hands, directing the full force of the curse at the lone, kneeling woman. But the circle of blue light, the ancient runes activated by the sacred ingredients, held firm, a shimmering, protective dome of serene energy. The battle was now one of pure will, a contest between the desperate, consuming power of the Guardian's magic, and the quiet, enduring strength of Alara's restorative ritual. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. Alara, using the shard of the fallen star as a great celestial lens, began to focus the energy of her ritual. The cool, resilient power of the Snowberry heart, the deep, emotional strength of the Spectral Tears, and the pure, creative light of the star itself all merged, coalescing into a single, brilliant beam of pure, white-hot energy. The beam shot upward from the center of the circle, piercing the heart of the emerald storm. It was not a violent explosion. It was a transformation. As the white light of the ritual touched the green, chaotic energy of the curse, a change began to occur. The sickly, emerald green began to soften, to fade. The storm did not break, it was soothed. The raging, howling wind softened to a gentle whisper. And the magical, green rain began to lose its malevolent glow, its drops now falling upon the earth not with a draining curse, but with the gentle, life-giving promise of a soft spring shower. The curse was not being destroyed, it was being healed. As the magic of the lantern was reversed, its power turned from consumption to restoration, a great, shuddering cry of agony came from the hooded figure at the edge of the circle. The guardian, his power inextricably linked to the curse, collapsed to his knees, his strength broken. As he fell, the great, dark hood that had concealed his face for so long fell back. The storm subsided as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind a profound and peaceful silence. The emerald light of the lantern flickered one last time, and then it too transformed, its inner glow now a warm, gentle, golden light, the color of the rising sun. Alara, her body trembling with exhaustion, her ritual complete, slowly rose to her feet. And she looked upon the face of her adversary for the very first time. He was an elf, as she had suspected. But he was far older than she could have ever imagined, his face a beautiful, tragic mask, etched with the deep, sorrowful lines of a grief that seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves. He was not a monster. He was not a creature of pure evil. He was, she saw now with her healer's eyes, a man in profound and terrible pain. She approached him cautiously. He did not move. He knelt on the damp earth, his body shaking, his power gone. Alara, a healer to her very core, felt not triumph, but a wave of deep and profound compassion. She knelt before him, not as a victor before the vanquished, but as a healer before one who is suffering. "Why?" she asked, her voice a quiet whisper in the stillness of the aftermath. "Why did you do this to my village?" The old elf looked up at her, and in his ancient, sorrowful eyes, she saw a story of such heartbreaking desperation that it took her breath away. "My daughter," he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping sound, like the rustling of autumn leaves. "She is dying." He told her a story of a rare and terrible magical ailment that had taken hold of his only child, a curse that no healer, no mage, had been able to break. He told her of his desperate, frantic search for a cure, a search that had led him to ancient, forbidden texts, to a dark and dangerous magic. In his desperation, he had forged the lantern, a powerful but terrible artifact, a flawed masterpiece that could sustain a life, but only by draining the life force of the land, and the people, around it. He had chosen Ivarstead, he explained, not out of malice, but because it was a place so full of life, its connection to the natural world so strong, that he believed its vitality could sustain his daughter until he could find a true cure. He had become the lantern's guardian, its prisoner, bound to its terrible, life-draining curse, his own life force slowly being consumed even as he used it to save his child. He was not a villain. He was a father, a desperate father who had made a terrible choice out of an all-consuming love. This was the price of the light. The faint, flickering life of his child, sustained by the stolen life of her village. A terrible, heartbreaking balance. Alara looked at the old, grieving elf, and she understood. She understood his desperation, his pain, and the terrible, tragic choice he had made. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. Her quest was not yet over. It had simply changed. "Take me to her," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with a new and unwavering purpose. "Take me to your daughter." The great conflict was over. But the true healing was just about to begin. In the quiet aftermath of the great emerald storm, a profound and holy peace settled over the ancient stone circle. The raging wind had softened to a gentle, cleansing breeze, and the torrential, magical rain had ceased. The sky above, once a canvas of bruised purple and sickly green, now slowly began to clear, revealing the first, faint, diamond-like glimmers of the evening stars. In the center of the circle, the emerald lantern, its curse now broken, its magic transformed, no longer pulsed with a malevolent, life-draining energy. Instead, it now cast a warm, gentle, golden light, a light that felt like the first rays of a new dawn, a light that held within it the promise of healing and of hope. Alara knelt on the damp earth, her body trembling with a profound exhaustion, her spirit weary from the great magical struggle. But as she looked at the kneeling elven guardian before her, his ancient, sorrowful face now illuminated by the lantern's gentle, golden glow, she felt not triumph, but a wave of deep and overwhelming compassion. His story, a tale of a father's desperate, all-consuming love for his dying child, had touched the very core of her healer's soul. She understood now that his actions, though terrible in their consequence, had not been born of malice, but of a pain so deep it had driven him to embrace a dark and forbidden magic. He was not a monster to be vanquished, he was a soul to be healed. "Take me to her," she said again, her voice quiet but filled with a new and unwavering purpose. "Take me to your daughter." The old elf looked up at her, his ancient eyes, which had held only the cold darkness of despair for so long, now filled with a flicker of disbelief, of a hope he had not dared to feel for centuries. He gave a slow, solemn nod. He rose to his feet, his movement still weak and unsteady, and without another word, he turned and began to lead her away from the stone circle, away from the quiet village, and toward a small, hidden path that led deep into the whispering woods at the base of the great mountain. Alara followed him, her hand still clutching the satchel that held the sacred ingredients. As they walked, she noticed a change in the land around her. The gentle, golden light of the transformed lantern, which the guardian still carried, seemed to spread out before them, and wherever it touched, a quiet miracle was taking place. The withered, brown grass at the side of the path began to stir, and from the dead earth, tiny, new, green shoots began to emerge, unfurling their delicate leaves in the warm, magical light. The great pine trees, which had stood as gaunt, brown skeletons just hours before, seemed to sigh, and a faint, green shimmer began to appear on their brittle, lifeless branches. The land itself was beginning to heal. Their journey was a short and silent one. The guardian led her to a small, hidden clearing, a place she had never seen before, though she had spent her entire life in these woods. In the center of the clearing stood a single, small, and beautifully crafted elven tent, its silken walls shimmering faintly in the twilight. He held back the flap of the tent, and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the air was still and warm. A single, small, magical light floated near the ceiling, casting a soft, gentle glow upon the scene within. On a simple bed of soft furs and clean, white linen, lay a young elven girl. She was as beautiful as her father, with the same delicate features and long, silver hair. But her face was pale, her breathing was shallow, and her body was frail, her skin having the same strange, unhealthy, ethereal shimmer that Alara had seen on the sick and dying villagers of Ivarstead. This was the source of the curse, the small, flickering flame of life that the great, terrible lantern had been desperately trying to sustain. Alara knelt by the bedside, her healer's instincts taking over. She gently took the girl's hand. It was cold, so cold. She could feel the life force, the magicka, within the child was faint, a fragile thread on the verge of snapping. She looked at the guardian, at the desperate father, whose eyes were now filled with a terrible, pleading hope. And Alara knew what she must do. She opened her satchel and once more laid out the 3 sacred ingredients. She took the flask containing the glowing, blue liquid of the Snowberry heart and the Spectral Tears, and she poured a single, shimmering drop onto her fingertips. She gently touched this drop to the pale forehead of the sleeping elven child. The moment it touched her skin, a soft, blue light spread out from the point of contact, a gentle, soothing wave of pure, restorative energy. Then, she took the shard of the fallen star. Its celestial light pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. She held it over the child's heart, and as she did, she began to chant again, not the powerful, commanding words of the breaking ritual, but a quiet, gentle, and ancient song of healing, a lullaby of restoration that her grandmother had taught her long ago. As she sang, the blue light from the shard intensified, its pure, creative energy flowing down into the child, not to fight a curse, but to mend what was broken, to restore what had been lost. And as she worked her quiet magic, the guardian brought the great lantern forward. But its light was no longer a sickly, consuming green. It was a warm, vibrant, life-giving gold. And as its gentle light fell upon the child, it no longer drained, but gave. The 2 forces of magic, the restorative power of Alara's sacred ingredients and the transformed, generative power of the golden lantern, now worked together in perfect harmony. For what felt like an eternity, the 3 of them, the healer, the father, and the lantern, poured their energy into the small, fragile form on the bed. And slowly, miraculously, a change began to occur. A soft, rosy blush began to return to the pale cheeks of the elven child. Her shallow breathing grew deeper, more regular. The strange, sickly shimmer on her skin faded, replaced by the healthy, natural glow of life. And after a long, deep sigh, her eyes, the same ancient, sorrowful eyes as her father, fluttered open. She was healed. A great, shuddering sob of pure, unadulterated joy broke from the old elven guardian. He fell to his knees, his ancient, proud face now wet with tears, not of sorrow, but of a gratitude so profound it left him speechless. Alara stayed with them through the night, watching over the sleeping child, ensuring the fever did not return. As the first light of a new dawn began to filter through the trees, she knew her work here was done. She rose to leave, but the guardian stopped her. He presented her with the lantern. Its light was now a soft, warm gold, its magic now a force of pure, gentle healing. "It is yours," he said, his voice filled with a deep and humble reverence. "You have transformed its curse into a blessing. It belongs with a true healer." Alara returned to her village as the sun was rising. And the sight that greeted her was one of pure, unadulterated joy. The blight was gone. The fields were once again a vibrant, living green. The great pine trees stood tall and proud, their needles glistening with a healthy morning dew. The river flowed with a clear, sparkling current. And the villagers, their sickness gone, their strength returned, were emerging from their homes, their faces filled with a sense of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. A new day had dawned for Ivarstead. A day of healing, of hope, and of rebirth. The curse of the Emerald Lantern was broken, its dark story over. And in its place, a new story had begun, a story of how a simple village herbalist, with a quiet courage and a healer's heart, had journeyed into the heart of darkness, and had brought back the light.